we hope. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and thank you to whoever invited me to come and speak here. I've given my talk A Question as the title, Open Access by 2020. The Commission began investigating open access to scientific publications in 2005. That was 7 years ago now. There's another 8 years to go before 2020. We have come some way in 7 years, but we've got an awful long way to go yet, as you will see from some of my slides. So can we do it by 2020? That's the challenge. The evidence base that we have for some of the things I'm going to say today are these things on this slide. There's been the consultation, which we've been hearing about today, and the survey of FP7 researchers, people supported by European money. About 15 months ago, there was a workshop of national experts held here in Brussels on open access and preservation, and they had quite a lot to say about the matter. There was a questionnaire to the ERA committee, and there have been many other public reports and surveys, some of which I've been involved in, and I'm also going to draw on my own work on advocacy for open access in some of the things I'm going to say. So hopefully none of the things I say will be made up. They will all be rooted in past work and data, hard data. So the aims then, if we're going to get to open access by 2020, 95% of research articles openly accessible. Not only openly accessible, but permanently and easily accessible. These are different things from open. And they should be reusable and properly linked to all other relevant material. That includes the data sets that support those articles. So we're looking at a different kind of scholarly communication system, one which is fully linked and fully functional to serve the needs of researchers and the public who wish to use this research. This will involve informed and willing behavioural change by researchers. And so far we've seen a little bit of that, but not enough. So that is where the area of work, that is the target for the work that we have to do. But there are other stakeholders that we have to move in on in the process of achieving that behavioural change by researchers. So is this realistic? It is still a big task. It should be realistic because when we've done surveys in the past to ask researchers why they publish their work, what you will see is that the main reason for publishing their work is to communicate it to their peers. Given that, one would think that they would welcome open access with open arms and that they would just get on and make their work open access. They haven't so far done very much of that. But cheeringly, at the other end of this graph, you will see that financial reward comes very low in researchers' expectations of publishing their work, which is just as well, because the plans for open access do not include any ideas about paying them to publish their work. And the positive points that we have now, that we know from all these other pieces of work, are that more than 4/5 of people consulted about the ERA consider open access to be important in achieving that. That's a very high number of people, so that's good. But then we've seen high numbers of people do things before. 20,000 people signed a petition 4 years ago in 3 weeks to ask the Commission to strengthen a policy on open access. 30,000 researchers, a couple of years before that, signed up to say that they were not going to support journals and publishers that obstructed open access. None of these things have borne much fruit, I have to say. Second point there is that the majority of researchers said that they find it easy or very easy to make the time to self-archive their work. That is, to put it into an open access repository and share it with everybody. And that's very encouraging, because up until now, if you say to researchers this is all you have to do, the first thing they say is, I'm too busy to take the 5 or 6 minutes that it takes to do that. So this is an encouraging result there from that survey, and they say they find it easy to inform the Commission about any problems they have in trying to do that, which is also good because we want to know what the problems are, who is obstructing them, why, and then we can work out how to help them around it. We also know that authors are very willing to comply with a mandatory policy. This is another survey that we did some years ago. It's been repeated. This was a worldwide one. It's been repeated in different countries around the world since, and it always comes up with these results. That is that, as you can see, if you add together the ones who are willing to comply to the ones who would comply reluctantly if told to do that, you get to the 95%. So again, that's very encouraging. The 5% who would not comply, I always say, we don't really mind about those, because if they're so ashamed of their work that they don't want others to be able to access it freely, we aren't very interested in it. Now, this graph, this slide, this is not meant for you to read it. This is just an attempt at some visualization here of things. Instead of presenting you with endless graphs with numbers on, this just gives you a feeling, so you can eyeball the number of mandatory policies that have been introduced over the last 10 years. And you'll see that there has been a growth, and 2009 was a star year in that respect. These are relatively correct to one another, but we've seen a drop-off in the last couple of years. We're not sure why. We know one reason why the numbers look less now, and that is that some policies are not being registered in the database that I get these data from. They're not being registered for a very good reason, but they do exist. Nevertheless, I think they are a minor number. So we haven't seen the continuing growth of policies, and this is one area where we need to work. The amount of open access literature is shown here on this slide. Each of those circles represents a discipline, and the little coloured segments are the proportions of gold and green open access in each of those disciplines. It varies from discipline to discipline, but in none of them is open access yet a majority, a major thing. It's always a minor part of the literature in each of those disciplines. And if we look at the growth of open access in those disciplines over the last 10 years, each bubble is relative to each other bubble, and simply the area of each bubble indicates the amount of open access in each year for that discipline. You'll see that they don't change very much in size. What we would have liked to have seen would have been them starting small at the bottom and getting to be very big at the top. So, although we are getting some growth, we're not getting as much as we want. The bottlenecks to this are shown on this slide. First of all, lack of awareness and understanding, and this is at both the researcher level and at the policymaker level. As a result of the lack of awareness and understanding at policymaker level, there has been limited policy development. Researchers are worried about copyright and whether they're going to infringe that, and they don't understand how to make their work open access while working within the copyright restraints that they choose to be under. There are misconceptions about quality of open access. I think they are now finally beginning to disappear, but they were a big factor up until quite recently. And of course, the cost of publishing in open access journals still remains quite a barrier for some researchers, and indeed for their institutions, and in some cases for their funders. The key factors of success that were highlighted in the workshop I mentioned, which happened a couple of years ago, were these. These were the main ones. that we need good infrastructural developments in Europe to promote and enable open access, that we need good policy development at all levels, including international level, and that didn't just mean international across Europe's member states, but international outside Europe's borders as well. We need, she sighs wearily, we need a lot of advocacy and culture change efforts. There is a lot going on, but we need more of it, and those of us engaged in it are certainly not going to be stopping. And the key to all this, I think, is collaboration, networking and coordination to lever the efforts that are being put in by everybody trying to promote and achieve open access. I would just want to say a word about each of these things. With respect to infrastructure developments, we already have OpenAIR, the European Open Access Repository, and that is collecting material from individual university repositories. What we don't have enough of are university repositories with a good policy on them so that they've got plenty of content to be harvested by OpenAIR. We are seeing a lot of developments on interoperability across that infrastructure, and I think there's a lot of good advances there. Obviously more to do, but that's a success story. There's plenty to do on data, as we've heard, and Ilaria will be talking about that, I think, a bit more later. And preservation still remains an issue. How are we going to keep all this material safely and for that permanent and easy access that I mentioned? The policy development, well, the Horizon 2020 mandatory policy is extremely welcome. And those of us advocating for open access are very grateful to the Commission for moving so far on this. We need a lot more institutional level policies, so we need to work with the universities of Europe to get those developed better. We have already got a lot of resources to help people understand things and raise their awareness, but I think we probably need to do a bit more focused advocacy for the different stakeholders in that respect. And again, we need to coordinate the actions by key players. Up until now, there have been many key players, but they have been working largely in isolation from one another, knowing what each other are doing, but not working specifically together. I think that has to change. And as I say, outreach beyond the European borders, because there is a lot of interest in other parts of the world in coordinating policy development across the globe rather than just continent by continent. For advocacy and culture change, policy implementation, of course, is the main target. We see a lot of projects and initiatives in member states, but we would like to see those linked up better, and we need to monitor them better too, so that we can see how well we're doing in that respect. Find some way of constantly keeping a tally of how things are going so that we can spot areas where more work needs to be done. And finally, collaboration, network and coordination is the key to the whole thing, and this is where I think the Commission does have the critical role. It can enable these things to happen much better than any other player in Europe, and so we look towards the Commission to help those of us who are working, including enabling open scholarship, which is, by the way, an association of university managers promoting open access. Those of us working in this sphere look now to the Commission to listen to us when we have ideas about how you can help us carry on our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alma, for bringing us up to date, showing what has been accomplished so far, what remains to be done, and nasty issues that have to be tackled. Our next presentation is by Dr. Ilaria Capua. She is an active researcher in the field of virology, working in the Istituto Zooprofilattico Sperimentale delle Venezie, working, if that is more or less correct, which is in the field of comparative biomedical sciences, working on important viral diseases like avian flu, influenza, and the like. And we are very pleased that she has agreed to take a day off from her actual research and speak to us on the value, the relevance of open access on publications and data in our meeting today. Ilaria, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks.